Chapter 1. The Cloakroom Confusion. It was after a triumphant performance at the Grand Imperial Opera that the smallest of incidents occurred, so small indeed that no one remarked upon it at the time. The final curtain had fallen to a storm of applause, bouquets had been flung with calculated abandon, the celebrated soprano, Madame Aurelia Virelli, had bowed again and again, her smile luminous beneath the blaze of the footlights. Society's finest had risen from their plush crimson seats in a flutter of silk and satisfaction, eager to be seen as much as to depart. Beyond the gilded doors of the auditorium lay the velvet, draped cloakroom, a chamber fragrant with perfume and impatience. Mirrors in ornate frames reflected a shifting mosaic of faces, flushed with admiration, sharpened with envy, softened by admiration. The attendant, a pale young woman whose composure had long since surrendered to the demands of the evening, accepted wraps, capes, and gloves with increasing haste. Among the many articles surrendered that night were 2 pairs of ivory opera gloves, each crafted from the finest kid leather. They were of such similar cut and shade that even the keenest eye might have mistaken one for the other. 1 pair belonged to Lady Margaret Ashbourne, widow of a distinguished diplomat, and known for her exacting taste. The other belonged to Miss Clara Ellington, a young patroness of the arts whose fortune was as recent as it was considerable. In the press of admirers and rivals, a mistake was made, or so it seemed. Lady Margaret, after a brief exchange of polite nods and veiled glances with Miss Ellington, accepted a pair of gloves from the attendant and departed. Miss Ellington did the same. The night swallowed them both without further comment. It was not until the following morning that the trivial exchange revealed its first thread of consequence. Lady Margaret Ashbourne rose at her customary hour, received her tea, and prepared to review her correspondence. She was a woman of disciplined habits, her days arranged with diplomatic precision as she drew on her gloves, intending to pay a call upon an acquaintance. She felt an unfamiliar stiffness in the lining of the right glove, her brows knit. Lady Margaret was not prone to oversight. She removed the glove carefully and turned it inside out. There, stitched with meticulous delicacy along the inner seam, was a narrow strip of paper no longer than a finger. It had been inserted with intention. No careless scrap would have survived such exact placement. With a small ivory letter opener, she severed the stitches and unfolded the strip. The message upon it was written in cipher. It consisted of a sequence of numbers arranged in groups, separated by dots and dashes, neither wholly numerical nor entirely symbolic. To the untrained eye, it might have resembled the idle scrawl of a child. To Lady Margaret, who had once assisted her late husband in matters of diplomatic discretion, it was unmistakably a code. A faint chill crept across her composure. Lady Margaret was not a fanciful woman. She believed in evidence, in reason, and in the measured response to adversity. Yet the presence of a cipher concealed within a glove, not her own, suggested deliberation. It suggested secrecy. It suggested that the exchange in the cloakroom had not been an accident at all. She rang for her maid. "Emily," she said, her tone controlled. "These gloves were not mine." The maid, a practical young woman, examined them with polite bewilderment. "They appear new, my lady." "They are not the pair I wore last evening. Mine had a slightly darker seam along the thumb." Emily offered a small apology for the I replied, "But not by you, pray continue." She unwrapped the glove and laid it upon the table. I observed at once that it was of the same exquisite kid leather as the pair earlier presented by Miss Ellington. The cut, the stitching, the shade of ivory, all were nearly identical. "After the opera last evening," Miss Ashford explained, "I returned home and placed my gloves upon my dressing table. This morning, when I prepared to go out, I noticed something unusual in the right glove, a stiffness, a faint irregularity in the seam." She paused as though recalling the moment. I examined it more closely and found a narrow strip of paper sewn into the lining. Her gloved hand tightened imperceptibly upon her reticule. "I can assure you, Mr. Poirot, the gloves are not mine." "You are certain?" "Quite certain. I purchased my gloves from a particular maker in Bond Street. These, though of excellent quality, are not from that establishment. The seam along the thumb is slightly narrower, Ah, the detail. It pleased me. And yet, I said gently, to the eye of the attendant in a crowded cloakroom, they would appear identical. Yes, then we have once again, I murmured, the possibility of an exchange. I lifted the glove and examined it carefully. The stitching had been executed with delicacy and precision. No clumsy hand had inserted the message. The seam had been opened, the paper placed within, and the thread resewn so seamlessly that detection required either accident or intent. I withdrew the strip of paper and smoothed it upon the table. The note contained a sequence of letters and numbers arranged with mathematical clarity. Each grouping was separated by a small dash, the alignment exact, the ink neither hurried nor hesitant. "This is not idle mischief," I observed. "That was my conclusion," Miss Ashford replied quietly. "I have no enemies that I know of, nor do I engage in games of intrigue." I studied her face. It was composed, intelligent, perhaps even cautious. But beneath the poise lay something else, watchfulness. "You wore the gloves last evening?" "Yes." "Both of them?" She hesitated. "Only for a fraction of a second. I wore the left glove throughout the performance. The right I removed after the first act. It was warm." I inclined my head. "And you carried it?" "Yes, draped over my fan." "Ah." I leaned back, steepling my fingers. "You see, Miss Ashford, this detail interests me greatly. The message was concealed in the right glove only." She followed my reasoning with evident quickness. "You believe it was meant to be discovered?" "I believe," I said slowly, "that the placement is significant. Gloves are worn, but they are also carried. A lady removes one glove to accept a program, to greet an acquaintance, to adjust a bracelet. The right glove, in particular, is frequently removed and handled." Her eyes widened slightly. "Then whoever concealed the message anticipated that it might be examined, or that it might be transferred." Silence settled briefly between us. I continued, "The act of concealment suggests secrecy, yet secrecy alone does not explain the choice of object. A glove is intimate. It belongs to the person. To place a message within it is to ensure that it remains close, until the proper moment." Miss Ashford's composure faltered, though only faintly. "You think I was intended to receive it?" "I think," I replied carefully, "that someone intended a particular lady at the opera to receive it. Whether that lady was you remains to be determined." She leaned forward. "Mr. Poirot, I assure you, I am not involved in anything clandestine. My attendance at the opera was purely social. I do not doubt your sincerity, Miss Ashford. But sincerity and knowledge are not the same thing." I turned again to the cipher. The sequence of letters and numbers possessed a rhythm, not random, not careless, deliberate. "You observed nothing unusual in the cloakroom?" I asked. "There was confusion, a crush of people. I recall another lady beside me, Lady Margaret Ashbourne, I believe. Our gloves were placed upon the counter at nearly the same moment. And when they were returned, the attendant seemed flustered. I took the pair handed to me without inspection." I nodded slowly. "Tell me, did Lady Margaret remove her gloves during the performance?" I could not say. We were seated in different boxes. I rose and paced once across the room. It is a habit of mine when the pieces begin to arrange themselves, but not yet perfectly. "Miss Ashford," I said at last, "there are now at least two nearly identical pairs of gloves, each containing a cipher concealed in the right lining. That is no coincidence." Her breath caught. "Two? Yes, you are not the first to bring such an object to me." She absorbed this in silence. "Then the exchange was deliberate," she whispered. "Perhaps," I replied, "or perhaps there were multiple exchanges. The cloakroom of the Grand Imperial Opera is a theatre within a theatre. Admirers, rivals, patrons, performers, many hands, many opportunities." I resumed my seat. "There is another matter," I continued. "You say you wore the left glove and carried the right." "Yes." "That distinction intrigues me. A worn glove bears the imprint of the hand, the warmth, the movement. A carried glove remains comparatively undisturbed." She considered this. You believe the right glove was meant to be inspected. I believe, I said softly, that crime speaks in subtleties, the smallest asymmetry, the smallest deviation from habit, reveals design. Her gaze sharpened. What would you have me do, for the moment? I replied. Nothing beyond discretion. Speak of this to no one. Retain your composure. If the message was intended for you, someone may soon seek confirmation that it has been received. And if it was not, then someone somewhere will discover that their carefully stitched secret has gone astray. The fire gave a small crackle. Miss Ashford rose, gathering her composure as one gathers a cloak. Mr. Poirot, she said, I place myself entirely in your hands. I bowed slightly. Be assured, Miss Ashford, that I shall treat this matter with the utmost delicacy. Subtlety, you see, is the language of crime, and I am fluent in its dialects. When she had departed, I returned to the table and aligned the two strips of cipher side by side. Their format was similar, precise, measured, but not identical. 2 gloves, 2 concealed messages, 2 ladies who insisted the gloves were not theirs. The opera had concluded in applause and brilliance. Yet beneath its music, another composition had begun. One written, not in notes, but in numbers and thread. And somewhere within that composition lay intention. I intended to find it. Chapter 3. The attendant's account, the Grand Imperial Opera, deprived of its evening brilliance, appeared almost austere in the grey clarity of morning. The glitter of chandeliers had surrendered to pale daylight, filtering through tall arched windows, where the previous night society had shimmered in silk and jewels. There now lingered only the faint scent of extinguished candles and polished marble. Hercule Poirot arrived precisely at 10 o'clock. He paused in the foyer, observing the symmetry of columns, the measured spacing of doors, the broad staircase, curving upward like a deliberate gesture. Order had been built into the architecture, yet somewhere within this carefully designed structure, disorder had occurred. And disorder, Poirot reflected, is rarely accidental. He had requested an interview with the cloakroom attendant on duty the previous evening. The management, uneasy at the mention of concealed messages, had complied with remarkable speed. Thomas Reed awaited him in a modest administrative office behind the main foyer. The room was functional rather than elegant. A tall iron filing cabinet, a large ledger desk, 2 straight-backed chairs, and a clock whose ticking seemed disproportionately loud. Reed rose immediately when Poirot entered. He was younger than Poirot had expected, no more than 22, with narrow shoulders and an expression strained by anticipation. His hands, though scrubbed clean, bore faint traces of polish and fabric dye. A working man, conscientious and careful. Mr. Poirot, sir, Reed began, swallowing audibly. I hope there has been no serious complaint. Poirot removed his gloves with deliberate calm and took a seat opposite him. There has been confusion, he replied evenly, and confusion interests me. Reed's fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. It was a very busy evening, sir. The performance was sold out. The final act ended nearly 20 minutes later than expected. When the audience rises all at once, well, things happen quickly. Let us speak slowly, Poirot said gently. Begin at the interval. Reed blinked, momentarily thrown by the unexpected starting point. The interval, sir. Yes, order at the end often depends upon order in the middle. Reed nodded uncertainly. The interval was steady but manageable. Many ladies reclaimed wraps temporarily and then returned them before the second act. I hung everything according to ticket number, as always. You work alone? Usually, yes. But during the interval a porter, Edward Haynes, assisted for perhaps 10 minutes. And what did he do? He handed me items as I sorted them, nothing more. Poirot leaned back slightly. Did you observe him handling any ivory opera gloves? Reed hesitated. There were many gloves, sir. Yet only a few of the finest kid leather, nearly identical. Reed's brow furrowed. He searched his memory with visible effort. I recall 2 pairs in particular, he admitted slowly. They were placed beside each other on the counter when returned during the interval. Very fine workmanship. By whom were they returned? One by Miss Ashford, the other by Lady Margaret Ashbourne. At the mention of the soprano's name, Poirot's gaze sharpened slightly. Describe the moment. They approached separately but nearly together. Lady Ashbourne was accompanied by a gentleman. Tall, dark hair, military bearing, he carried her program. Did you recognize him? No, sir. And Miss Ashford? She was alone. She spoke little. Did the two ladies acknowledge each other? I cannot say. If they did, it was brief. Poirot allowed the ticking clock to fill the pause. Now, he continued, let us proceed to the end of the performance. Reed shifted uneasily. When the curtain fell, the crowd surged. People do not wait in orderly lines after such performances. They press forward. I work as quickly as I can. You follow ticket numbers. Yes, sir. Always. And yet, there was a moment of disruption. Reed's throat tightened visibly. Yes. Describe it. There were two ladies at the counter, Miss Ashford and Miss Marlowe again. Their tickets were consecutive numbers. I reached for the gloves placed beneath those tickets. Were the gloves already paired? I believed so. Belief is not certainty. No, sir. Reed inhaled deeply. As I lifted one pair, a gentleman at the side called out, insisting I had overlooked his coat. I turned my head. In that moment, one glove slipped from the counter and fell. Which glove? I cannot swear, sir. It happened quickly. You retrieved it? Yes. And then? I handed the first pair to the nearest ticket extended toward me, then the second pair. You did not examine them? No, sir, it would have delayed the line. Poirot's gaze did not waver. Did either lady examine her gloves before leaving? I do not believe so. Miss Marlowe was immediately surrounded by admirers. Miss Ashford departed swiftly. And the gentleman who called out about his coat. Did you resolve his complaint? Number when I looked again, he had stepped back into the crowd. Did he retrieve any item? I did not see him do so. Would you recognize him again? Reed hesitated. I am not certain. He wore his hat low. His coat collar was raised. Was he tall? Average height? Confident? Yes. Yes, I believe so. Poirot folded his hands. Mr. Reed, you fear for your position. Reed's composure faltered entirely. I have worked here 3 years, sir. My mother depends on my wages. I would never intentionally. I do not suspect you of intention, Poirot interrupted gently. But I am interested in opportunity. Reed blinked. Opportunity, sir. Yes, crowded spaces create cover. A fallen glove provides distraction. A confident gentleman raises his voice. In such moments, small exchanges may occur unnoticed. Here Reed's breathing quickened. You think someone interfered? I think someone may have engineered the confusion. The word hung between them, engineered. Yes. Suppose, for example, that one of the gloves had already been altered, opened, a paper concealed within, resewn with care. Suppose further that its owner did not intend to retain it. Reed swallowed. Then the owner would need it placed in the hands of another lady. Precisely. And the confusion would make that possible. Poirot inclined his head. You see how simple it may be. Reed's fingers trembled slightly. But why, sir? Why use gloves? Poirot allowed himself a faint smile. They are not inspected publicly. They are worn close to the skin. A lady may carry one without remark. They are exchanged without suspicion. Reed stared at the desk. And if the wrong lady received it, that, said Poirot softly, is the danger of all plans. He rose slowly. One final question, Mr. Reed. During the interval, or after the performance, did you observe anyone lingering behind the counter? And you're not authorized? No, sir. Only Mr. Haynes assisted. I shall wish to speak with him. Yes, sir. Poirot paused at the door. Mr. Reed, fear is natural. But remember this, guilt trembles differently from anxiety. Yours is the latter. Reed looked up, relief flickering across his features. Thank you, sir. Outside, Poirot descended the marble steps with deliberate thoughtfulness. Two ladies, nearly identical gloves. A fallen glove, a distracted attendant, a confident stranger creating urgency. The elements formed not chaos, but choreography. Accidents in crowded places occur daily, yet when the same crowded place produces two concealed ciphers stitched into right-hand gloves, coincidence begins to strain under the weight of probability. Who benefited? Miss Ashford, who insisted the gloves were not hers. Miss Lydia Marlowe, whose public brilliance masked unknown private concerns, or some third party, unseen, deliberate and patient. Poirot stepped into the winter air. The opera had provided music, the cloakroom had provided confusion, but somewhere behind both lay design. And design, once traced, leads always to its architect. Chapter 4. The admirer Miss Lydia Marlowe received Hercule Poirot in a private sitting room adjoining her rehearsal chamber at the Grand Imperial Opera. Though it was scarcely noon, she was already dressed with care, her dark hair arranged with precision, her posture erect, as though still beneath the gaze of an audience. She was a woman accustomed to admiration. Even in repose, there lingered about her an air of performance, not artificial but cultivated. Her eyes were large and penetrating, her smile practiced yet not insincere. One sensed that she had long ago learned to measure every glance directed toward her, and to calculate its worth. "Mr. Poirot," she said, extending her hand with graceful deliberation, "I understand there has been some confusion regarding my gloves." Her voice, though softened for conversation, retained a depth and control that hinted at its power upon the stage. "There has been more than confusion," Poirot replied gently. "There has been design." She did not start, but the faintest tightening at the corner of her mouth betrayed her alertness. "I assure you," she said, seating herself opposite him, "I am quite innocent of intrigue." "Innocence," Poirot murmured, "is often most convincingly proclaimed by those who do not speak of it." She laughed lightly. "You must forgive me. Life in the theatre teaches one to anticipate accusation." "I accuse no one," Poirot said calmly. "I observe." He studied her hands as she folded them in her lap. Long fingers, steady, elegant hands that commanded applause. "You attended the opera last evening," he continued. "I performed." "Indeed, and after the final curtain. There was the usual chaos: admirers, critics, bouquets, invitations. Among these admirers was Mr. Charles Denton." At the name, her expression shifted, subtle but perceptible. "Yes, he sent flowers. He always sends flowers, and requested a private word." She inclined her head slightly. "He is persistent." "Does that persistence trouble you?" "Not particularly. Mr. Denton is known for extravagant gestures and discreet intrigues," Poirot suggested. Her gaze sharpened. "You have been speaking to others." "I speak to many people," he replied mildly. Miss Marlowe rose and crossed to a small side table where an arrangement of white lilies stood in crystal. She touched one absently. "Mr. Denton is wealthy, influential, and accustomed to acquiring what he desires. He enjoys attention. That is his principal vice." Poirot allowed the silence to lengthen before asking, "Did he approach you in the cloakroom after the performance?" "Yes, he assisted me in retrieving my shawl." "And your gloves?" She hesitated, barely perceptibly. "Yes, he handed them to me." "Did he handle them?" "For a moment. I was adjusting my wrap, only for a moment." "Yes." Poirot's gaze did not leave her face. "Miss Marlowe, when you departed the opera, were you wearing both gloves?" Her composure wavered. "No," she said at last. "I had removed one. It was warm backstage." "Which one?" "The right." "And you carried it?" "Yes." "In your hand?" "Yes." "Visible to others?" She frowned slightly. "I suppose so." "While the left remained worn?" "Yes." Poirot nodded slowly. "A glove not worn is visible. A glove worn is hidden." She regarded him with curiosity. "You attach great importance to gloves, Mr. Poirot." "I attach importance to asymmetry." He leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, did Mr. Denton comment upon your removing the glove? Did he appear anxious, distracted?" Not at all. He was in excellent spirits. Did he seek privacy? He requested a few minutes alone. Yes. And you granted them? For a brief conversation only. Where? In the side corridor, near the artist's entrance. Was anyone present? Not that I noticed. Poirot folded his hands. Miss Marlowe, 2 nearly identical pairs of ivory gloves were present in the cloakroom last evening. Each contained a concealed message stitched into the lining of the right glove. Her eyes widened, not theatrically, but genuinely. A message. Yes, written in cipher. She remained silent for several seconds. I know nothing of it, she said quietly. I do not say that you do. But you suspect that I was intended to receive one? I suspect, Poirot replied carefully, that someone intended a lady departing that opera to receive a message, and that the message was concealed within a right-hand glove deliberately carried. Her breathing slowed, controlled. Why the right glove? She asked. Because it is the glove most frequently removed. The glove that may be held, passed, or examined without attracting undue attention. She considered this. And if the wrong lady received it, then someone somewhere would be waiting for confirmation that the correct lady had read it. And if that confirmation did not come, Poirot's eyes hardened slightly. Then impatience might follow. A faint tension entered the room. Mr. Poirot, she said at last, you are suggesting that the exchange in the cloakroom was not accidental. I am suggesting that it may have been engineered. She moved back to her seat slowly. You believe Mr. Denton capable of such a scheme? I believe Mr. Denton capable of elaborate gestures. He denies knowledge of any coded message. Denial, Poirot said softly, is often truthful in wording and false in omission. You think he concealed something within my glove. I think he had opportunity. She studied him carefully. You have spoken to him? Yes. And what did he say? He denied all knowledge of a cipher. He admitted, however, that he handled your gloves when retrieving your shawl. She exhaled slowly. That is true. Did he handle both gloves? I believe so. Even the one you carried? Yes, he lifted them from the counter before you removed the right glove. After, I think. Think carefully. She closed her eyes briefly. I had already removed the right glove backstage. It was in my hand when we approached the cloakroom. He took it from me momentarily while adjusting my shawl. Ah, Poirot's voice grew very quiet. So he held the right glove. Yes, and you did not inspect it before departing. Number, did you inspect it later? She hesitated again. I cannot recall. Miss Marlowe, he said gently, did you discover anything unusual in your gloves? Her composure returned swiftly. Number, are you certain? Yes. Have you examined them since? Number, I should like to see them. A flicker of resistance passed across her features. Is that necessary? Quite. After a moment's pause, she rang for her dresser and requested the gloves. While they waited, Poirot regarded her in silence. She did not avert her gaze. Do you trust Mr. Denton? He asked quietly. She considered the question carefully. I trust him to pursue his interests, nothing more. Does he know yours? She smiled faintly. Poirot examined them with meticulous care. The left glove appeared undisturbed. The right, he turned it gently inside out. The lining had been opened and re-sewn, neatly, deliberately, but empty. No paper remained. He looked up slowly. Miss Marlowe, he said, this glove once contained something. Her face drained of color. You are certain? Entirely. Then someone removed it. Yes. When? That is the question. She rose abruptly. Mr. Poirot, I swear to you I found nothing. I believe you, then Mr. Denton may have placed something or removed something, or both. Her composure cracked for the first time. Why would he involve me in such a thing? Perhaps you were not the intended recipient, Poirot replied calmly. Perhaps you were the courier. She stared at him. I would never knowingly. I do not suggest knowledge. He folded the glove carefully and returned it to the table. There is intent in visibility, he continued softly. A glove carried is seen, a glove worn is concealed. Whoever concealed the message wished it to be handled, perhaps even transferred. And if it was removed before I examined it, then the plan altered. By whom? Poirot's eyes grew thoughtful. By someone who realized that the exchange had not occurred as intended. Silence filled the room. Miss Marlowe lowered herself slowly into her chair. "This is no longer a trifling confusion," she said. "No," Poirot agreed. "It is no longer trifling." Outside, faint strains of rehearsal drifted through the corridor, music rising and falling, oblivious to the undercurrent of intrigue within the chamber. 2 gloves containing ciphers. Zone glove emptied before discovery, a devoted admirer with opportunity. And once again, the right glove carried openly in the hand. Poirot rose. "Miss Marlowe, until I advise otherwise, speak of this to no one. Observe Mr. Denton closely. If he seeks reassurance, give him none." She nodded slowly. "And you, Mr. Poirot, I shall consider," he said, "why a message would be placed within a glove, only to be removed again before its purpose was fulfilled." As he departed, his mind moved with quiet precision. The carried glove asserted its importance once more. A glove worn is hidden. A glove carried is visible. And in visibility, there is always intent. Chapter 5. The rival opera is rarely sustained by talent alone. It is nourished by ambition, sharpened by envy, and perfected by the silent endurance of those who wait in the wings. For every celebrated soprano who stands beneath the brilliance of chandeliers, there is another who stands just beyond the light, poised, patient, and prepared. Clara Bennett was such a woman. Hercule Poirot arrived at the Grand Imperial Opera shortly before noon, at an hour when rehearsals murmured, faintly behind closed doors, and the grandeur of the previous evening seemed almost like a fading dream. The corridors smelled faintly of dust, powder, and warmed varnish. Costumes hung in neat rows behind partially open wardrobe doors. Somewhere in the distance, a soprano voice practiced a sustained note, pure and unyielding. Clara Bennett received him in a private rehearsal chamber, situated on the quieter side of the building. The room was modest in scale, but impeccably ordered. A small, upright piano stood against the far wall, its surface polished to a dark sheen. Sheet music lay stacked in precise alignment upon a narrow table. A vase of white carnations stood upon the windowsill, their petals fresh but understated. The arrangement struck Poirot immediately. There was nothing flamboyant in the room, nothing accidental either. Miss Bennet rose as he entered. She was fair, where Lydia Marlowe was dark, restrained where Marlowe radiated presence. Her face possessed balance rather than brilliance. Her eyes, however, were observant, watchful in a manner that suggested habitual evaluation. "Mr. Poirot," she said with a slight inclination of her head, "I understand you are inquiring about last evening's disturbance." Her tone was courteous, carefully neutral. "I am inquiring about a series of circumstances," Poirot replied, removing his gloves and seating himself without haste. "Disturbances are rarely singular." She resumed her seat at the piano bench, hands folded lightly in her lap. "I hope I can be of assistance." "I am certain you can." There was no challenge in his voice, merely confidence. "Miss Bennet," he began, "you are Miss Marlowe's understudy." "Yes, for how long?" "2 seasons. And you are satisfied with that position?" A faint smile curved her lips. "Satisfaction is not the word one associates with understudy, Mr. Poirot. One associates patience." "Ah," he said softly, "patience." He let the words settle between them. "Opera thrives upon rivalry," he continued. "Would you agree?" "It thrives upon excellence," she corrected gently. "And excellence invites comparison." "Yes, and comparison invites ambition." Her gaze did not waver. "Ambition is necessary in art." "Necessary," Poirot echoed. "But is it always harmless?" She leaned slightly forward. "Are you suggesting that I harbor resentment toward Miss Marlowe?" "I suggest nothing. I observe that rivalry sharpens performance, and occasionally blunts goodwill." She considered him carefully. "Miss Marlowe is a remarkable performer. I would be foolish not to learn from her." But you would not object to replacing her. That, she said evenly, is the nature of my profession. Poirot inclined his head. On the evening of the performance, you remained near the cloakroom after the final curtain? Yes. For how long? I cannot say precisely. Perhaps 5 minutes. Longer than required to collect one's belongings. I had misplaced my fan. The ivory fan with silver ribs. Yes. Who saw this fan? No one, to my knowledge. Did you mention its loss to any member of staff? I asked one attendant briefly. Thomas Reed. I believe so. He does not recall the conversation. Her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly. He was overwhelmed. Indeed. Poirot rose and walked slowly toward the window, examining the carnations without touching them. Miss Bennet, he said quietly, did you approach the cloakroom counter more than once? I do not believe so. You do not believe? I approached when I realized the fan was missing. Only then. Yes. And you handled no gloves? Number. Not even inadvertently. Number. He turned toward her. You own gloves of pale ivory leather. Yes, of fine quality. I appreciate good workmanship, as do many of the ladies present last evening. She did not respond. May I see them? She hesitated, but only for a breath. Of course. She removed her gloves slowly and placed them upon the piano lid. Poirot approached. He lifted the right glove first. The leather was supple and precise in cut. The craftsmanship matched that of the other gloves he had examined. Miss Ashford's, Miss Marlowe's. She turned the glove inside out. There, along the inner seam, ran a line of stitching subtly darker than the original thread. It was recent, neat, entire. When was this seam opened? He asked quietly. A week ago. For what reason? It had loosened. By whom was it repaired? Mrs. Clark in wardrobe. I shall confirm this. You are welcome to. Poirot traced the seam lightly with his fingertip. Your pair leaves marks, he murmured. It is a glove, Mr. Poirot, not a state document. Yet it may carry messages as important. She did not smile. You think I concealed something there? I think the seam has been opened fully, not merely reinforced. And what do you imagine was placed within? That depends upon who required concealment. Silence stretched. Miss Bennet's composure remained admirable, but beneath that composure, Poirot sensed calculation, not panic. You were near Miss Marlowe when she departed, he said at length. Yes, she wore only her left glove. Yes, and carried the right. Yes. You observed this clearly. I did. Why? Because it was unusual. Unusual things attract attention, yes, and opportunity. Her gaze sharpened. You speak as though opportunity itself were guilt. Number opportunity is merely the open door. Guilt is the decision to pass through it. She folded her hands once more. I did not pass through any doors last evening. Yet you remained in the corridor. For my fan, which no one else saw. She exhaled softly. Mr. Poirot, do you know what it is to live perpetually in another's shadow? I know, he replied. What it is to observe shadows. That is not the same. Number, it is often more revealing. She rose abruptly and crossed to the piano, touching the closed lid as though steadying herself. You believe I tampered with her gloves. I believe you had proximity. That is not crime. Number, nor is ambition. Agreed. Then why this interrogation? Because Miss Marlowe's right glove was opened. And emptied. She froze. Emptied? Yes. You are certain? Entirely. She turned slowly to face him. Then someone removed what had been placed there. Yes. And you believe that someone was me? I believe, he said softly, that you lingered near the cloakroom longer than necessary, that your own right glove bears recent stitching, and that you observed the carried glove with particular clarity. Her voice dropped. If there was a message, perhaps it was never meant for her. An interesting hypothesis. Perhaps she intercepted something not intended for her, and perhaps someone else realized the error and corrected it. Quickly, very quickly. Poirot studied her. Miss Bennet, if one wished to intercept a concealed message during the confusion of departure, how might one do so? She met his gaze steadily. One would need the glove to pass through one's hands. And did it? Number? Not even when it fell. Her expression shifted. You saw it fall. I did not see, but I know it did. She hesitated. I recall something dropping. And I did not retrieve it. Who did? I cannot say. Did you see Mr. Denton near the counter? Yes. And his demeanor? Confident, certain, possessive? Yes. Of Miss Marlowe, or of something else? Her silence spoke more clearly than denial. Poirot stepped closer. You are intelligent, Miss Bennet. I try to be. You understand that if Miss Marlowe were discredited, the leading role might pass to you. Her chin lifted slightly. I would accept it if offered. Even if the offer came under unfortunate circumstances. Her voice hardened. I would not engineer misfortune. But would you refuse its benefits? She did not answer. The silence deepened. In the corridor beyond, a tenor voice faltered mid-phrase, then resumed. Ambition and melody intertwined. Poirot returned the glove gently to the piano. A seam opened once, he said quietly. May conceal something twice. She regarded him without blinking. Are you warning me? I am observing you. And what do you observe? That patience can become impatience. That admiration can conceal rivalry. And that the theatre offers many places where small exchanges pass unnoticed. Her voice softened slightly. Mr. Poirot, I have waited years for opportunity. I would not risk everything for a petty intrigue. Then this is not petty. The words lingered. She studied him closely. What do you believe the message contained? I do not yet know. But you think it matters? Very much. He moved toward the door. One final question, Miss Bennet. If you had discovered such a message within a rival's glove, what would you have done? She answered without hesitation. I would have read it. And then I would have decided whether to keep it or return it. Return it, he echoed softly. Yes. To whom? To the person who feared its loss. Poirot's eyes gleamed faintly. An interesting choice. He bowed slightly. Thank you, Miss Bennet. As he stepped into the corridor, the echoes of rehearsal swelled faintly around him. Rivalry thrives as surely as melody. Miss Bennet had denied interference. She had acknowledged ambition. She had recognized opportunity. And her right glove bore the mark of recent opening. Repair leaves marks. And those marks speak, but whether they speak of guilt or merely preparation remained to be determined. Somewhere among these women, admired, patient, calculating, a message had been stitched, intercepted, and perhaps redirected. The theatre was no longer merely a stage for music. It had become a stage for design. And the design, though intricate, would unravel. Of that, Hercule Poirot was certain. Chapter 6. The faithful friend. It is a peculiarity of human nature that loyalty and vigilance often wear the same expression. A friend who insists upon protection may be motivated by devotion or by fear. The distinction is rarely visible at first glance. It must be studied, patiently, as one studies a pattern whose repetition is too regular to be accidental. Miss Eleanor Ashford received Hercule Poirot in her drawing-room that afternoon. The house stood in a quiet square, not far from the river, its exterior dignified rather than ostentatious. Within, the furnishings were tasteful and restrained. Pale walls, carefully chosen paintings, a writing desk arranged with almost architectural precision. There was order here, intentional order. Miss Ashford rose as Poirot entered. She was composed as ever, her expression thoughtful, but not distressed. If the recent revelations had unsettled her, she did not display it openly. "Mr. Poirot," she said, offering her hand, "I am grateful you agreed to return so quickly." "I return," he replied gently, "because new details rarely wait for convenience." She gestured for him to sit. Tea had been set upon a low table, the silver service gleamed without flaw. "You have spoken with Lydia?" she asked. "Yes." "And with others?" "Yes." She inclined her head slightly. "I had hoped you would." Her tone suggested something more than curiosity. "You insisted the exchange be investigated," Poirot observed. "You expressed concern for Miss Marlowe's reputation." "Of course," she replied without hesitation. "She is a public figure. Even the smallest whisper may harm her." "A whisper," he repeated softly, "or a message." Her gaze held steady. "You believe there is danger. I believe there is intention." She was silent for a moment, then said quietly, "Then we must prevent scandal. Is that your principal concern?" She met his eyes directly. "Yes." He did not contradict her. Instead, he shifted slightly in his chair. "Miss Ashford, you and Miss Marlowe are close." "Yes." "How close?" She considered before answering. "We share a history. We were educated at the same academy. Though our paths diverged, we remained friends." "You differ in temperament." "Yes." "In what way?" "Lydia is expressive, impulsive. I am, perhaps, more deliberate, more precise." A faint smile touched her lips. "Yes. Precision is admirable. It prevents missteps, does it?" Her smile faded almost imperceptibly. "You imply that I have misstepped." "I imply nothing." He leaned forward slightly. "When you first described the gloves to me, you distinguished carefully between left and right. I noticed the difference. You were certain that Miss Marlowe removed her right glove before the applause had ended." "Yes, you recall the moment clearly." "I do." "Why?" She hesitated, not from confusion, but from calculation. "Because it struck me as unusual." "In what way?" "Lydia is accustomed to dramatic gestures. She waved to the audience barehanded." "Barehanded only on the right." "Yes." "Did she remove the glove backstage or on stage?" "On stage during the curtain call." "And you observed this?" "Yes." "From where were you seated?" "In the left box." "And Miss Marlowe?" "Center stage." "You had a clear view of her hands?" "Yes." "Even amidst applause?" "Yes." Poirot's eyes rested upon her face. "Why remove only one glove?" She answered promptly. "It was warm beneath the lights." "Then why not remove both?" She did not respond immediately. "I cannot say. Comfort, perhaps," he continued softly. "Or preparation." Her gaze sharpened. "Preparation for what?" "For something that required the right hand." Silence fell between them. The ticking of a small clock upon the mantelpiece became suddenly audible. "Miss Ashford," Poirot said gently, "when did you first discover the concealed paper in the glove you received?" "The following morning." "You examined it alone?" "Yes." "You did not immediately inform Miss Marlowe?" "Number. Why?" "I wished to understand it first." "Understand what?" "Whether it concerned her." "And did you conclude that it did?" "I feared it might." "Yet you brought it to me?" "Yes." "Before speaking to her?" "Yes." "That is cautious." "I prefer caution to panic." He inclined his head. "And your own gloves?" She reached calmly to a small table beside her and produced them. "They are here." Poirot accepted them. They were ivory leather, fine though subtly different in cut from those he had examined earlier. He turned first the left glove inside out. The seam was intact, no irregular stitching, no disturbance. Then the right, also intact. No concealed cavity, no recent repair. He returned them to her. "No hidden seam," he said. "Number, no alteration." "Number." "Innocence," he murmured, "sometimes lies not in what is concealed, but in what is carried." Her expression did not change, but her fingers tightened slightly around the gloves. "You think I carried something. I think you carried knowledge." She regarded him steadily. "What knowledge?" "That Miss Marlowe removed her right glove deliberately. I observed it." "You observed it with unusual attention." "I noticed details." "Yes, so do I." He rose slowly and walked toward the window, gazing out upon the quiet square. "Tell me, Miss Ashford, when the glove fell in the cloakroom, did you see it?" Her breath paused almost imperceptibly. "I heard something drop." "Did you see who retrieved it?" "Number, did you see Mr. Denton near the counter?" "Yes." "And Miss Bennet?" "Yes." "Where was she positioned?" "Near the side table. She claimed to be searching for something." "A fan, yes." "You knew she had not misplaced it." Her eyes flickered. "I did not say that." "But you suspected it." "I suspected she lingered unnecessarily." "Why?" "Because she watches Lydia closely. With admiration, with ambition." "Ah." He turned back toward her. "You are protective of Miss Marlowe." "Yes, but you also observe her vulnerabilities, as any friend would." "Would a friend intercept a message intended for her?" Her composure remained intact. "I would prevent harm, even if it required secrecy?" "Yes, even if it required deception." She did not answer. The silence lengthened. Finally she said, "Mr. Poirot, you question me as though I were a suspect. I question you as one who sees more than she admits." Her eyes met his without wavering. "What do you believe happened?" "I believe," he replied softly, "that the right glove was central from the beginning." She remained still. "It was removed on stage. It was carried in the hand. It was visible." "Yes, visibility invites interaction." "Yes. If a message were concealed within it, someone could ensure its transfer." "Or its interception," she added quietly. "Yes. You think I intercepted it. I think you are capable of recognizing its significance." She rose now, moving toward the fireplace. "You must understand," she said, her voice controlled. "Lydia's career rests upon reputation. A whisper of scandal." "What scandal?" "I do not know." "Then why assume one?" She did not reply. He stepped closer. "Miss Ashford, if you discovered a cipher within a glove intended for your friend, what would you do?" She answered slowly. "I would determine its meaning. And then I would decide whether she should see it. On what basis? On whether it endangered her, or endangered someone else." She inhaled softly. "You think too darkly. I think methodically." He regarded her for a long moment. "You described the glove distinction before I asked." "Yes." "You emphasized the right glove." "Yes." "You remembered precisely when it was removed." "Yes." "Precision," he murmured, "can indicate innocence or involvement." She turned back toward him. "I have nothing to conceal." "Then tell me, did Miss Marlowe appear anxious before the performance?" She hesitated. She was distracted. "In what way?" "She received a note earlier in the evening." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "A note?" "Yes." "From whom?" "I do not know." "Did you see it?" "Number, she placed it in her dressing case." "And afterward?" "She seemed unsettled, yet she performed brilliantly." "Yes." "Did she remove the right glove before or after receiving this note?" "After." The word hung between them. "Miss Ashford," he said very quietly, "when you insist upon protecting a friend, one must ask, from whom?" She held his gaze. "From those who would exploit her, and from those who would expose her." Her lips pressed together. "I will not allow Lydia to be harmed, even if she herself has acted recklessly." "She would not." "You are certain?" "Yes." He inclined his head slowly. "Innocence may lie not in concealment, but in what is carried." She said nothing. "But sometimes," he continued, "what is carried is heavier than what is hidden." The clock on the mantel chimed the quarter hour. Poirot moved toward the door. "Miss Ashford, until I resolve this matter, you will refrain from further intervention." "I have not intervened." "Not visibly." She did not respond. He paused before departing. One final question. If the glove exchange were deliberate, who benefits? She answered without hesitation. Not Lydia. And you? Her eyes flashed briefly. I seek only to protect. Protection, it is a word of virtue. And yet, Poirot reflected as he stepped once more into the quiet square. Protection may conceal motives as complex as ambition. Miss Ashford's gloves bore no hidden seam, no stitched cavity, no repair. But she carried memory with unusual clarity. She carried vigilance. She carried knowledge of a prior note received by Miss Marlowe, and she carried determination. Sometimes innocence lies not in what is concealed, but in what is carried, and sometimes what is carried is the most dangerous thing of all. Chapter 7. The cipher. There are crimes that announce themselves with violence, as though demanding attention by the sheer force of their intrusion. And there are others, more dangerous, more sophisticated, that speak only in whispers, a pause too long before an answer, a seam stitched too neatly, a glove carried instead of worn. It is with these whispers that my mind is most at ease, for they are the language of intention, and intention, once detected, is the thread by which one may unravel the whole tapestry. I had now before me 3 objects of significance: the cipher recovered from the glove that came into Miss Ashford's possession, the knowledge that Miss Marlowe's right glove had been opened and emptied, and the troubling certainty that at least one pair of gloves belonging to an ambitious understudy bore marks of recent seam work. Around these details moved a cast as polished and practiced as any company upon a stage, each capable of performance, each capable of concealment. Yet the cipher itself remained the heart of the matter. Without its meaning, all else was merely suspicion arranged in elegant rows. I do not claim that ciphers are beyond me. On the contrary, I have encountered them often enough to respect their habits. The amateur is flamboyant. He believes complexity equals security. The professional is sparing. He values clarity for the intended reader and confusion for all others. The strip of paper in question was not flamboyant, it was precise. It contained groupings of letters and numbers arranged with such careful regularity that even the spacing appeared measured. There were no smudges, no overwriting, no hesitation. Whoever composed it had time, composure, and purpose. I sat at my table that evening, the lamps positioned so that the light fell evenly, no shadows, no glare. Disorder in lighting leads to disorder in thought. I had the strip of paper, a clean sheet for notes, and a list of possible reference points. The opera program, the cloakroom tickets, if they could be obtained, and the simplest of all keys. The habits of the human mind, for a cipher is not merely mathematics. It is psychology. The first step is always to ask, what sort of person writes this? Not in character, but in method. The groupings were short, repeated in patterns. Certain numbers appeared more frequently than others, certain letters clustered as though they belonged together. This suggested a substitution of some kind, rather than an elaborate transposition, but the presence of both letters and numbers hinted at a key outside the message itself. A book cipher, perhaps, or a program cipher. The opera program lay beside me, its pages thick and creamy, the ink crisp. It listed acts, scenes, performers, and notes. If one wished to hide instructions, what better than to make the key something everyone possessed? The program is carried openly, folded, discarded. It draws no attention, and for those who understand, it becomes a map. I tested the simplest hypothesis first, that the numbers corresponded to page and line, or to act and bar. But the groupings did not fit neatly. The repetition was too deliberate. I then considered the cloakroom tickets. Numbers. Yes, but those would be sequential and limited. Moreover, a message stitched into a glove suggests portability, not reliance on an object that might be lost or retained by the wrong person. Then I remembered something small, so small it might have been overlooked by anyone less attentive than myself. The cipher had been stitched into the right glove. The right glove, as I had already observed, is the glove most frequently removed and held. A message meant to be carried and read, not a code for long deliberation by a scholar in a study, but an instruction meant to be understood within minutes by someone who had a reason to understand. Therefore, the key must be simple, the method direct. I returned to the message and read it again, not as symbols, but as intention. The groupings were of similar length, implying words. The punctuation, small marks dividing the groups, suggested separation of phrases. And then, there was one element that struck me as particularly telling: the presence of a repeated pair of numbers at the beginning and near the end, like a refrain. Refrains belong to music, and we were, after all, in the world of opera. I opened the program to the section listing the evening's performance. The piece had been a revival of a familiar work, with an aria so celebrated that even those ignorant of music could hum its refrain. That refrain, printed in the program as an excerpt in the original score, included bar numbers. Bar numbers, it is true that not all programs list them, but this one did, for the benefit of a certain class of patron who enjoys pointing at the page and murmuring to companions about structure and technique. Vanity, too, can serve the criminal. I compared the repeated numbers in the cipher with the bar numbers in the excerpt. They matched, not in order, but in range. I smiled then, not from pleasure, but from the satisfaction that comes when the little wheels begin to click into place. The method was this: the numbers corresponded to bar numbers within the printed excerpt, and the letters corresponded to the note names, which then mapped to a simple alphabet substitution. A clever device, and yet not overly complicated. It required only that the intended reader possess the program and have enough familiarity with the excerpt to interpret it. But I had another advantage. I had no need to sing. It transcribed the relevant sequence, converted the note, letter positions into alphabetical equivalents, and within an hour the message began to appear, faint at first, like writing revealed beneath lemon juice, then clearer as the pattern established itself. The words that emerged were not romantic, they were not poetic. They were instructions, cold, economical, and precise. A meeting time, a location, and a phrase that tightened the atmosphere of the room as though someone had lowered a window and let in the river fog. Deliver to the silent hand. I read it twice. Then a third time. There are phrases that carry within them the stamp of a particular world. My dearest belongs to one. I shall ruin you belongs to another. But deliver to the silent hand, that belongs to a realm where people do not write their names, where faces are replaced by signals, and where the most valued quality is not affection but discretion, espionage, one might say, or something that borrows its manners. I will confess that the word, in itself, does not frighten me. One hears it often in conversation among those who read newspapers and enjoy imagining themselves at the center of hidden dramas. But what frightened me was not the word. It was the way the instruction had been placed into the life of a singer and her acquaintances, disguised within the frivolity of opera. Going. The opera house, crowded and glittering, provides ideal cover. People dress as though for celebration. They arrive in groups, depart in confusion, gather in corridors and side entrances. A stranger may speak to a stranger and be assumed merely another admirer. A small parcel may be passed with the gesture of returning a program or adjusting a shawl. Nothing, in such a place, is unusual, because everything is performance, and the glove, light, easily transferred, intimate, and unexamined, was the perfect vessel. I sat still for some time, considering what I had learned. The message gave a time and a location near the riverside. It did not name the recipient, only the method, to the silent hand. A silent hand. One may interpret such a phrase in many ways. It might indicate a person who does not speak. It might indicate a hand extended without words. A beggar's, perhaps, or a porter's. It might indicate a drop, a hand, shaped mark, a sculpture, a sign, or it might mean exactly what it says, that the delivery is to be made without conversation, without hesitation, without recognition, which is to say, a hand that takes and says nothing. Now, we return to the central question. To whom was this message intended? Certainly not Miss Ashford. Of that I was convinced. Miss Ashford's entire manner, her poise, her attention to detail, her insistence upon investigation. For Lydia's sake, suggested a woman who valued control. If she were engaged in clandestine exchange, she would not have come to me so promptly with evidence. She would have attempted to interpret the message herself quietly and adjust events. She might have tried to intercept, to protect, to steer. But she would not have invited a world-renowned detective into her home unless she believed her own position secure. Yet the message was discovered in a glove that reached her hands. That fact could not be ignored. It meant, therefore, one of two things: either the message was intended for someone else and came to her by accident, or it was intended to pass through her hands as part of a design. The second possibility is always more unsettling, because it implies the manipulator knows you better than you know yourself. I reviewed the chain. Miss Marlowe removed her right glove on stage before the applause ended. That fact Miss Ashford recalled with striking precision. The right glove was then carried. Visible, Mr. Denton, the admirer, admitted to handling Miss Marlowe's gloves briefly while retrieving her shawl. He also confirmed that she carried one glove, rather than wearing both. His hesitation at that question had not suggested guilt so much as belated awareness. He had noticed something only when asked, as most men notice women's gloves only when they are made to. Miss Bennet, the understudy, lingered near the cloakroom under an excuse: the missing fan that no one corroborated. She owned similar ivory gloves, and her right glove bore recent stitching. Thomas Reed, the attendant, recalled two women with similar wraps and nearly identical gloves. He had named Miss Ashford and Miss Marlowe. A glove had fallen. He could not swear whose it was. And somewhere in the midst of this confusion, a message meant to guide a clandestine exchange had been sewn into a right glove. If the message had been intended for Miss Marlowe, why would she remove the glove so conspicuously before the applause ended? Comfort is possible. Yes, lights are warm, hands sweat, but a professional performer is accustomed to discomfort. The removal of a single glove, only one, at that precise time suggests intention, however small yet. When I examined Miss Marlowe's right glove, it had been opened and emptied. The message was no longer there. That meant either she had found it and removed it, or someone else had done so after it passed through her hands. She swore she knew nothing. I believed her. Not because I am sentimental, because she had looked at the matter as an artist looks at an unexpected flaw, with irritation and confusion, not with calculation. She had been frightened in a particular way, the way of someone who senses a threat to reputation but cannot locate its source. So Miss Marlowe likely did not remove the message. Then who did? The message that Miss Ashford possessed, was it the same as Miss Marlowe's missing message, or a separate one? It was possible that two identical messages had been prepared to ensure success, one stitched into each of two nearly identical pairs of gloves. But that would be extravagant and dangerous. Yet the operation, whoever was behind it, had already shown a taste for elaborate staging. I laid out the possibilities as one lays out chess pieces, considering each move not in isolation, but as part of a strategy. If Mr. Denton was involved, he might have placed the message in Miss Marlowe's glove earlier. Perhaps during the moment, he took her glove to adjust her shawl. But would he have had time to stitch it, unless the glove had been altered beforehand and the message inserted earlier? In which case, Mr. Denton's handling would serve only to transfer or retrieve. But Mr. Denton was not a man of fine needlework. He was a man of broad gestures, of flowers, of confident intrusions. His intrigues were social rather than technical. He might finance such a scheme, he might deliver a package. But would he stitch paper into kid leather? Unlikely, unless he had help. If Miss Bennet was involved, she had access to wardrobe and seamstresses. She had the means to open seams and resew them neatly. She had the motive of proximity, to observe, to intercept. She also had the habit of patience. Understudies are trained to wait without complaint, to smile while wanting. That patience stretched too thin can become very dangerous indeed. But what would she gain from espionage instructions? Unless the content was not espionage at all, but a masquerade of it. The phrase silent hand could belong to any clandestine arrangement. Blackmail, theft, bribery. One does not need foreign governments to justify secrecy. One needs only shame. Then there was Miss Ashford herself. the faithful friend whose memory was too precise. She had no hidden seam in her own gloves. True, but that proves only that she did not conceal the message within her own pair. It does not prove she did not convey it, whether knowingly or unknowingly. Innocence sometimes lies not in what is concealed, but in what is carried. And now, the message itself demanded action. The instruction included a meeting time near the riverside. That time, I noted, was for the following evening, tomorrow, that gave the sender confidence that the message would be read swiftly. If it were intended for Miss Marlowe, it presumed her attention would be drawn to the carried glove and the secret found at once. If it were intended for someone else, it presumed that person would receive it promptly, but the message had misfired. I was now holding it. That fact alone altered the entire design. Whoever orchestrated the exchange would expect the recipient to appear at the riverside meeting and deliver something to the silent hand. If no one appeared, or if the wrong person appeared, consequences would follow. In matters of covert exchange, failure is rarely tolerated with patience. I therefore resolved upon a course that was both simple and necessary. I would attend the riverside meeting. Not as the intended courier, but as the observer. I would see who waited, who watched, who approached with an outstretched hand that did not speak. But before that, I required two further clarities. First, what was to be delivered? The message did not specify an object. That omission suggested that the courier would already possess it, or would be given it at the opera. It might be a small parcel, a slip of paper, a key, even a jewel. It might be something that could fit within a glove second who was expected to deliver. The message had been concealed within a glove, an item strongly associated with women in that setting. One may argue that men wear gloves as well, but in the opera cloakroom, it is women's gloves that are removed, carried, exchanged. The vessel itself implies the courier. Therefore, the intended courier was likely a woman present at the opera, one who would remove her right glove and carry it. Making the glove visible and transferable, Miss Marlowe did exactly that. So did Miss Ashford. At least at some point, though her account emphasized observation rather than action. Miss Bennet, too, wore ivory gloves, and she had been near the cloakroom. 3 women, 1 glove, 1 message. I sent notes that afternoon, brief, polite, requesting the presence of certain persons at my apartment at different times. Not together. That would produce performance for an audience. Separately, that produces truth in fragments. To Miss Marlowe, I sent word that I had discovered the meaning of the cipher and must speak with her urgently. To Miss Ashford, I requested she come and confirm certain details about the evening. To Mr. Denton, I invited him to clarify his movements near the cloakroom and to answer a question he had not yet been asked. And to Miss Bennet, I sent a message equally courteous, equally firm, that I required her assistance in identifying a name connected with wardrobe repairs. Some detectives believe in surprise as a weapon. I believe in arrangement. Surprise is for the criminal. Arrangement is for the mind. That evening, Miss Marlowe arrived first. She entered my sitting room with her usual composure, but there was a tightness in her shoulders that betrayed the strain she had endured since our last conversation. A singer may conceal fear upon a stage, but in a quiet room with no audience, it clings to her like the scent of powder. "You have deciphered it?" she demanded at once. "Yes," I replied, "and it concerns me." "It concerns you," I said carefully, "because your name and your life provide the stage upon which it has been played. Whether you are an actor or merely scenery remains to be determined." Her eyes flashed. "I am no one's scenery." "Then you must be very precise with me, Miss Marlowe. Precision is the only defense against manipulation." She sat, hands clasped tightly. I placed the strip of paper on the table between us, not the original, but a copy, for I do not care to risk the loss of evidence. "The message gives instructions," I said. "A meeting time, a location near the riverside, and a phrase, 'Deliver to the silent hand.'" Her face went pale. "That is impossible," she whispered. "Nothing is impossible," I replied. "Only improbable, Until it is done. She stared at the words as though they might rearrange themselves into something more innocent. I have never, she began, then stopped. Never attended such a meeting, I supplied. Number never delivered anything to anyone's hand without speaking. Mr. Poirot, this is absurd. Absurdity is often a disguise, I replied calmly. Tell me, did you receive any note before your performance? She froze. How do you know? I know because your friend observed that you were distracted. She did not know its content, only its effect. Miss Marlowe's lips pressed together. Yes, she admitted, I received a note. From whom? I do not know. It was brought to my dressing room. What did it say? Her eyes flickered away. It was peculiar. Peculiar in what manner? It said only, carry the right glove. I watched her carefully. That, you see, is the sort of detail that separates comfort from preparation. Who brought it? I asked. A boy from the stage door, one of the runners. Did you keep it? Number, I destroyed it. Why? Because it frightened me. Frightened you enough to obey. She flinched. I did not think. You did not think because the stage teaches one to obey cues, I said gently. A cue is given, you respond. You did not analyze because you were busy preparing to sing. Someone exploited that. Her breathing came faster now. I carried the glove, she whispered. Yes, I did. I thought perhaps it was some foolish prank, something from Denton. He has done ridiculous things before. And did you tell him? Number, did you show anyone the note? Number, did you mention it to Miss Ashford? Number, then you carried the glove and trusted that nothing would happen. Yes. And afterward, I said softly, your glove was opened and emptied. She stared at me, horror dawning fully. Then someone put something there, something I did not know, and took it away again. Exactly. Miss Marlowe covered her face with her hands, bare hands ungloved. I have been used, she said, her voice muffled. Yes, I replied, but we may still discover for what purpose. When she had left, shaken but composed enough to return to her duties, I sat alone for a moment and considered the new fact, the note that instructed her to carry the right glove. That note destroyed could not be examined, but its existence confirmed what I had suspected. The glove's visibility was not incidental, it had been commanded. The plan was to make Miss Marlowe a courier, an unwitting one. Now, at last, the shape of the affair began to emerge. Samanon had planned to use the opera's glittering chaos to move an object, something small, into Miss Marlowe's possession, concealed in a right glove she was instructed to carry. She would then deliver that object at a riverside meeting to the silent hand. But something had gone wrong. Either she received the wrong glove, or the wrong person received hers, or someone feared she might open it and discover too much, and so intercepted the content before she could. And that meant the engineered accident had misfired. I believe the error was intentional, but the recipient mistaken. A paradox. Number, a tactic. For when one wishes to disguise intention, one creates the appearance of error. One engineers an accident so that observers, attendants, rivals, friends believe chance is responsible. And yet, chance can be controlled, like the flow of a crowd toward a cloakroom door. But there is always risk, and in that risk lies my opportunity. Tomorrow evening, near the riverside, someone would expect a delivery to the silent hand. If the delivery failed, someone would notice, and if someone noticed, then someone might attempt to correct it. That correction, is often the moment when the criminal reveals himself, because impatience makes him careless. So I prepared, not with pistols and brute force. Those are vulgar solutions, but with observation, with arrangement, with a careful placement of truth where it could not be ignored. For in the end, it is not the cipher that will solve the mystery. It is the human being who wrote it, and the human being who believed himself safe behind its neat, cold instructions. Tomorrow, by the river, I would see which hands reached out in silence. And then, at last, I would begin to hear the voice behind them. Chapter 8. The engineered error. There are moments in every investigation when the scattered fragments cease to resist arrangement. They do not yet confess their full meaning, but they begin to align. A gesture once dismissed as trivial acquires structure. A hesitation acquires motive, and what was assumed to be accident reveals the delicate outline of design. It was in the quiet of the late afternoon, seated at my writing table with the river's dull light filtering through the curtains, that I reconstructed the movements of that evening at the opera, not as they had appeared amid applause and velvet, but as they must have occurred in truth, step by deliberate step. To understand disorder, one must first restore order. Let us begin with Miss Clara Bennet. She possessed motive, not the crude motive of hatred, but the refined motive of advancement. She lived perpetually in the shadow of Miss Marlowe's success. An understudy is a peculiar creature, indispensable yet invisible, praised yet overlooked. Such a position breeds a patience that may either ennoble or corrode. Miss Bennet had access to wardrobe repairs. Her own right glove bore recent stitching too complete to be a mere reinforcement. A seam opened fully, not partially. A cavity created, not merely mended. She had lingered near the cloakroom under the pretext of a lost fan, an object no one else had seen. She had observed, with careful clarity, that Miss Marlowe removed her right glove and carried it. She had positioned herself near the counter when confusion erupted. All of these facts, individually, prove nothing. Together, they suggest intention. Now let us consider the cipher. The message instructed a delivery to be made at a riverside location, at a specific hour, to the silent hand. It did not specify the object to be delivered. That omission implies that the object was already known to both sender and intended courier. The message served not to describe the object, but to arrange the transfer. The glove, therefore, was not merely a container for the message. It was the signal. Why a glove? Because it is personal, easily exchanged, and rarely examined. Because it may pass from hand to hand under the most ordinary of gestures. Retrieving a shawl, adjusting a wrap, assisting a lady through a doorway, and why the right glove? Because it is frequently removed and carried. A carried glove is visible. A worn glove is concealed. Visibility allows recognition. Recognition. That word is central. The intended recipient of the glove was not meant to open it immediately and examine its seam in private study. He, or she, was meant to recognize it by some subtle mark. When I revisited Miss Bennet's gloves in memory, I recalled something minute, almost absurd in its delicacy. Along the hem of her right glove, just inside the wrist, there had been the faintest imperfection, a thread of slightly darker hue forming a nearly invisible notch. At the time, I noted it only as evidence of recent work. Now, I understood it differently. A mark for identification. One does not conceal a message within a glove and then rely solely on chance for its correct delivery. There must be a way for the intended intermediary to distinguish it from another nearly identical pair. The subtle interior mark along the hem provided that distinction. And who, among those present, might be expected to notice such a mark? Not Thomas Reed, the anxious attendant, not Miss Marlowe, distracted by applause and admirers, but Mr. Charles Denton, Mr. Denton, who prided himself upon attention to detail in matters of courtship and intrigue. Mr. Denton, who handled Miss Marlowe's gloves when retrieving her shawl. Mr. Denton, who admitted to noticing belatedly that she carried only one glove. Suppose, then, that the plan was as follows. Miss Bennet sews the message into her own right glove. She arranges to be near the cloakroom at the height of departure. During the confusion, perhaps even encouraging it by a calculated movement, she allows her right glove to fall. The attendant retrieves it, uncertain to which pair it belongs. In the crush of ticket numbers and extended hands, the glove is returned not to Miss Bennet, but to another lady. But this is not random. She knows his habits. She has observed his attentions to Miss Marlowe. She anticipates that he will approach the counter, perhaps assist Miss Marlowe once more. The glove, meant to be identified by its interior mark, is to be recognized by Mr. Denton, when he handles it. He will then carry it, under the pretext of gallantry, and deliver it to the riverside meeting. Why Mr. Denton? Because he is precisely the sort of man who enjoys secret errands. He has money, mobility, and discretion when it suits him. He is bold enough to attend a late meeting by the river without fear, and he is vain enough to relish the sense of involvement in something covert. Thus the chain was intended to be rival to admirer to riverside contact. Miss Marlowe herself would be nothing more than scenery, a convenient distraction. But plans, however meticulous, are vulnerable to the smallest deviation. In the cloakroom that evening, 2 nearly identical pairs of gloves were present. Miss Bennet's and Miss Marlowe's. Both pale ivory, both fine leather, both recently handled. Miss Marlowe, having obeyed the mysterious note instructing her to carry the right glove, made that glove visible. She removed it before the applause had ended, a gesture noticed by Miss Ashford with unusual precision. She then carried it openly. Mr. Denton, attentive as ever, assisted her. He handled her gloves, both the worn left and the carried right. At that moment, the similarity became fatal. If Mr. Denton was expecting to identify Miss Bennet's glove by its subtle interior mark, he would need to inspect it closely, but in the hurried politeness of departure, he may have relied instead upon surface appearance. The pale ivory leather, the length, the cut, and when a glove fell to the floor, whether by accident or design, he may have seized upon the opportunity, believing it to be the one he sought, but he was mistaken. He took Miss Marlowe's glove instead, the wrong glove. The engineered accident had misfired. No, consider the consequences. If Mr. Denton believed he possessed the marked glove containing instructions, he would carry it away. Perhaps he would examine it privately. Perhaps he would discover no message, because Miss Marlowe's glove had none, unless of course it did, and was later emptied. But Miss Marlowe's right glove, when I examined it, bore evidence of having been opened and emptied. That suggests that at some point the message had indeed been within her glove. How can that be reconciled? Only if the confusion extended further. Let us reconstruct more carefully. Miss Bennet sews the message into her own right glove. She positions herself near the cloakroom. She allows her glove to fall. In the confusion, Thomas Reed retrieves it. Mr. Denton, nearby, believes the fallen glove to be the marked one. He takes it, perhaps under the guise of assisting Miss Marlowe. But the glove he takes is not Miss Bennet's. It is Miss Marlowe's. Why? Because Miss Marlowe's glove was visible, carried in her hand. When confusion arises, visibility guides assumption. A glove already carried is more easily mistaken as the fallen one. Thus Mr. Denton leaves with Miss Marlowe's right glove. Miss Bennet's glove, containing the message, may have been returned to her, unnoticed. But here lies the complication. Miss Ashford discovered a cipher within the glove she received. Which glove was that? If Miss Ashford inadvertently received Miss Bennet's glove, the one containing the message, then the plan had failed in 2 directions. Mr. Denton carried the wrong glove, and Miss Ashford received the correct one, a double misfire. And yet, such an outcome might still be salvaged. If someone realized the mistake quickly, who would realize it? Miss Bennet. She would know, almost immediately, whether the glove returned to her was hers or not. If she received her own glove back intact, with the message still concealed, she would know the transfer had failed. If she received a glove not hers, she would recognize the error. In that moment, she would need to act swiftly. If Mr. Denton had taken the wrong glove, Miss Marlowe's, he might discover no message inside. But if, by chance, he handled Miss Marlowe's glove long enough to inspect it and suspect confusion, he might attempt to open it, especially if he had been expecting a concealed instruction. That could explain the open seam and emptied lining of Miss Marlowe's glove. But the message found by Miss Ashford was intact. Therefore, Miss Ashford must have received the glove containing the cipher. The chain of hands, attendant, admirer, rival, friend, twisted unexpectedly. The visible glove betrayed the invisible plan. What had been intended as a subtle exchange between rival and admirer had instead passed through the hands of the faithful friend and Miss Ashford, precise and observant, brought the matter directly to me. This was not part of the design. When a criminal plan goes awry, the conspirator must decide: abandon the scheme or attempt correction. The Riverside meeting time approached. If Mr. Denton arrived with the wrong glove and no object to deliver, the silent hand would wait in vain. If Miss Bennet realized the mistake and retrieved the message from her own glove before anyone else discovered it, she might attempt to rearrange matters. But Miss Ashford had already brought the cipher to me. The plan had escaped its architect, and that is when danger increases. For a failed clandestine exchange is rarely left unresolved. Someone invested effort in that cipher. Someone expected a delivery. Someone waits by the river. I rose from my chair and walked to the window, watching the slow movement of water beyond the buildings. The Riverside location specified in the cipher was a narrow stretch, near an old warehouse. Quiet at night, sparsely lit, frequented by dock workers and occasional carriages. An ideal place for a silent hand to extend itself without drawing attention. If Mr. Denton arrived, there expecting to deliver something he did not possess, he would be vulnerable to anger, to accusation, perhaps even to violence. If Miss Bennet realized the plan had failed, she might attempt to prevent his arrival or to intercept him before he reached the river. If Miss Ashford suspected the implications, she might follow, out of misguided loyalty. And Miss Marlowe, poor unwitting Miss Marlowe, might yet find her name entangled in a scandal far darker than misplaced gloves. The engineered error had done more than misdirect a glove. It had destabilized the entire chain of exchange. I returned to my table and wrote a brief note to Captain Hastings, requesting his presence the following evening. There are occasions when one requires not merely observation, but a second pair of eyes, and perhaps a steady arm, should matters turn unpleasant. For though this mystery began with ivory leather and delicate stitching, it now moved toward darker ground. The visible glove had betrayed the invisible plan. And by the river, in the shadow of warehouses and fog, someone would discover just how costly that betrayal might be. Chapter 9. The silent hand. The river at night possesses a quality unlike that of any drawing room or theatre. It is honest in its darkness. It does not glitter for applause, nor soften its edges for comfort. It moves with indifferent persistence, reflecting only what light is forced upon it. At the appointed hour named in the cipher, I stationed myself near the Riverside warehouse, specified in the instructions. It was an old structure of brick and iron, long used for storage of imported timber, and now only partially occupied. A single lamp burned at the corner of the quay, casting a dull circle upon damp cobblestones. Beyond that circle, shadows gathered without apology. He had arrived early. One does not attend such meetings at the precise minute of their arrangement. One arrives beforehand, observes, measures the environment, notes entrances and exits, and considers retreat should circumstances demand it. Captain Hastings accompanied me at a discreet distance, instructed to remain out of sight unless required. He bore his usual air of restrained excitement, though I had cautioned him that this was not a melodrama, but a matter of calculation. The night was cold. A faint mist drifted from the river, blurring outlines and rendering figures uncertain until they stepped fully into the lamplight. At 5 minutes before the appointed time, I observed movement at the far end of the quay. Miss Clara Bennet approached. She walked with steady pace, neither hurried nor hesitant. Her coat was dark, her hat pulled low, her posture controlled. She paused just beyond the lamplight, as though uncertain whether to advance fully into its exposure. One detail, however, required no light to confirm. She wore a glove upon her left hand. Her right hand was bare. A silent hand, she scanned each passer-by with measured discretion. Not the anxious searching of a woman expecting rescue, nor the idle curiosity of one awaiting a companion, but the focused vigilance of someone expecting recognition. Recognition again. She stepped nearer the warehouse door and positioned herself beside a stack of crates, partially sheltered from the open quay yet visible to anyone approaching from the street. She waited. At the appointed minute, another figure emerged from the mist. Mr. Charles Denton. He approached with his customary confidence, though there was a tension in his stride absent from our earlier conversations. He glanced once over his shoulder, then toward the warehouse, and at last toward Miss Bennet. She stiffened almost imperceptibly. He slowed. They did not greet one another warmly. Indeed, they did not greet one another at all. He stopped 2 paces before her. "Is this necessary?" he muttered, his voice low but edged. "You are late," she replied. "I am precisely on time. You were instructed." I received no instruction. The words hung in the damp air. Her composure faltered for the first time. "What do you mean?" "I mean exactly what I say," Denton replied sharply. "I expected." He stopped himself. "You expected what?" she demanded quietly. "Never mind." His right hand moved restlessly against his coat pocket. "And where is it?" she pressed. He stared at her. "Where is what?" Her face drained of color. "You have it," she said. "I have nothing." For a brief moment, neither spoke. Confusion clouded her expression. Not theatrical, not feigned, but genuine. In that instant, I stepped forward from the shadow. "Good evening," I said gently. Both turned sharply. Mr. Denton swore under his breath. Miss Bennet's eyes widened, not in surprise at my presence alone, but in sudden comprehension. I removed from my coat pocket the ivory glove. The right glove. "You expected this, I think," I said quietly. Silence followed. The river lapped against the quay. Miss Bennet did not deny it, her eyes fixed upon the glove with unmistakable recognition. Mr. Denton looked from her to me and back again. "What is this?" he demanded. "A glove," I replied calmly, "but also a failed arrangement." Miss Bennet's shoulders straightened. "You have no right," she began. "I have every right," I interrupted softly. "When an innocent woman is used as a courier without her knowledge." Mr. Denton stared at her. "You involved Marlowe?" he asked, incredulous. "She was convenient," Miss Bennet replied before she could stop herself. There it was, convenient. The word hung heavier than accusation. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "The plan was elegant, Miss Bennet. You sewed the message into your own right glove. You marked the hem subtly so that Mr. Denton could identify it when handling Miss Marlowe's gloves at the cloakroom. You arranged confusion, allowed your glove to fall, and trusted the attendant to misdirect it. Denton would recognize the marked glove, retrieve it, and carry it here, to deliver its contents to the silent hand." Mr. Denton's face darkened. "Is that true?" he demanded. She did not answer him. Instead, she looked at me. "You misunderstand," she said coldly. "Do I? You assume espionage. It was nothing so dramatic." "No," I agreed. "Not espionage between nations. Something more personal, more profitable." Her jaw tightened. I continued. "The message did not describe the object to be delivered because the object was already known to you and Mr. Denton. Performance contracts. Draft agreements promising financial ruin to Miss Marlowe." Denton's breath caught. "You said those were preliminary drafts," he muttered. "They were," she snapped. "To be signed under pressure," I added quietly. "Terms that would transfer a significant share of future revenue to an unnamed holding company. A company controlled by whom? Miss Bennet." She did not reply. "Controlled," I continued, "by interests aligned with Mr. Denton." He recoiled slightly. "I did not know," he began. "You knew enough," I said. His face flushed with anger. "You told me she would agree willingly." "She would have," Miss Bennet said sharply, "under certain circumstances. If confidential contract drafts were misplaced and then recovered under conditions that compromised her bargaining position." Miss Bennet's silence confirmed more than protest could deny. The opera rivalry had concealed commercial espionage, not national secrets, but financial ones. Miss Marlowe's upcoming performances were to be renegotiated. Her popularity granted her leverage. But if confidential documents promising her favorable terms were intercepted and altered, or if damaging clauses were introduced quietly, her position could collapse. Miss Bennet, as understudy, would then assume prominence under contracts far less advantageous to the star. Mr. Denton, with financial interests in the opera's management, would profit handsomely from revised agreements. The glove was merely the vehicle. The plan was to pass the draft documents to an intermediary, I said, gesturing toward the warehouse. The silent hand. A clerk willing to alter copies before official presentation. Denton's eyes widened. I never agreed to forgery. You agreed to advantage. I corrected. He swore softly. Miss Bennet's composure returned in a different form now, no longer anxious, but resolute. You cannot prove this, she said. On the contrary, I replied. The cipher instructs delivery. Miss Marlowe received a note telling her to carry the right glove. She obeyed, unknowingly. You relied upon her obedience. She said nothing, but the similarity of gloves betrayed you. Mr. Denton took the wrong one. Miss Ashford received yours instead and brought it to me. Your engineered accident misfired. Denton turned to her fully now. You fool, he muttered. Her eyes flashed. You were careless. I was not the one sewing gloves in dressing rooms, and you were not the one standing on stage risking exposure. They stopped abruptly, aware of the futility of further denial. The river continued its indifferent murmur. I stepped closer, lowering my voice further. Miss Bennet, ambition is not crime, but conspiracy to undermine contractual integrity combined with deliberate deception invites consequences. She looked at the glove in my hand. You have no documents, she said. No, I admitted, because they were never delivered. And you cannot prove intent. Intent is often written in behavior, I replied. You came here gloved only on the left hand. You waited in precisely the location named in the cipher. You expected a transfer. Mr. Denton ran a hand through his hair. I want no part in this, he said abruptly. You are already part, I replied. But you may yet choose honesty. He hesitated only a moment. She approached me weeks ago, he said. Suggested Marlowe was overvalued, that the opera could renegotiate if certain leverage existed. Miss Bennet's gaze hardened. You betray easily. I do not enjoy riverside meetings with detectives, he retorted. I held up the glove once more. This is the silent hand, I said quietly. Not because it takes, but because it reveals. Miss Bennet stared at me. What will you do? She asked. That depends upon you. She laughed once without humor. You intend to protect Marlowe. I intend to restore balance. Balance, she repeated bitterly. She has had balance for years, and you sought to correct it by deceit. Silence settled heavily. Finally, she said, I wanted only what she never had to fight for. Recognition, I suggested. Yes, and you believed ruin was the path to recognition. She did not deny it. Hastings emerged discreetly from the shadows at my signal. The moment of confrontation had passed. What remained was consequence. Mr. Denton looked diminished now, his earlier bravado replaced by calculation of personal damage. Miss Bennet stood straighter than either of us, her ambition unmasked, but not extinguished. You will withdraw, I said to Denton, completely. Any attempt to revisit contract negotiations under suspicious urgency will draw inquiry. He nodded reluctantly. And you, I said to Miss Bennet, will resign from your position quietly, or I shall ensure the management understands precisely why this meeting occurred. Her eyes burned. You would destroy my career. No, I replied gently. You endangered another's. The river wind stirred her coat. For a long moment, she seemed to consider defiance. Then, slowly, she removed the glove from her left hand and dropped it at her feet. I resign, she said quietly. Ambition may bend when confronted by exposure, but it rarely disappears, as she turned and walked away along the quay, her right hand still bare. I felt no triumph, only the sober recognition that talent and envy often share a stage too small for both. Mr. Denton lingered. You will not involve the authorities? He asked. That depends on your future conduct, I replied. He nodded and left without further protest. When the quay was empty save for Hastings and myself, he exhaled deeply. "Commercial espionage in an opera house," he muttered. "I should never have suspected." "Nor should Miss Marlowe," I said quietly. I looked once more at the glove in my hand. The silent hand had not taken anything tonight, but it had revealed everything, and sometimes that is sufficient. Chapter 10. The loudest voice in the quiet of my sitting room, with the lamps arranged at equal height and the tulips restored to perfect symmetry. I reflected upon the curious eloquence of objects. The affair of the gloves had concluded without public scandal. No newspapers had printed headlines of conspiracy. No constables had marched through the opera's grand foyer. Miss Marlowe continued to sing. Mr. Denton withdrew his financial influence with studied discretion. Miss Bennet submitted her resignation on grounds of artistic redirection, a phrase vague enough to satisfy management and merciful enough to avoid humiliation. Outwardly, the music resumed its place as the dominant sound of that glittering world. Yet beneath the polished surface of resolution lay a lesson more enduring than applause. A glove is fashioned to conceal the hand, yet it may reveal the mind. I sat in my armchair, the recovered right glove resting upon the small round table before me. Its ivory leather, so delicate in appearance, had borne within it ambition, calculation, and the fragile architecture of deceit. It had travelled from rival to attendant, from admirer to friend, and at last to my own pocket, its silent journey more articulate than any confession. Hastings, seated opposite me, regarded the glove with visible fascination. "It seems absurd," he remarked at length, "that something so trivial should expose such a scheme." "Nothing is trivial," I replied gently, "if it is placed with intention." He nodded, though not entirely convinced. "Miss Bennet nearly succeeded," he said. "Had the gloves not been so similar—" "Ah," I interrupted softly. "It was precisely because they were similar that she failed." He looked at me with mild perplexity. "Explain." "Miss Bennet relied upon resemblance," I said. "She assumed that similarity would permit substitution without detection, and she was correct. Up to a point, the opera house, crowded and glittering, provided cover. Applause drowned subtle movements. Admirers obscured exchanges. In such confusion, nearly identical gloves become indistinguishable. And yet, I continued, she overlooked the difference between what is worn and what is carried." Hastings leaned forward. "You refer again to the right glove." "Yes." I lifted it carefully. "A worn glove is forgotten. It conforms to expectation. It remains upon the hand, unnoticed because it fulfills its purpose. But a carried glove, particularly one removed before the applause has ended, invites attention. It breaks symmetry." Hastings considered this. "So when Miss Marlowe removed her right glove, she altered the balance," I said. "She transformed an accessory into a signal. Miss Bennet had anticipated this removal only because she herself had arranged for it." The anonymous note delivered to Miss Marlowe's dressing room, "Carry the right glove," had been the subtle command that set the machinery in motion. Miss Bennet understood stage psychology. A performer responds to cues. The instruction would appear mischievous, perhaps romantic, but not sinister. Miss Marlowe obeyed. She removed her right glove before the applause had ended and waved barehanded to her admirers. A gesture applauded as dramatic flair. Yet in that moment, the glove became visible, and visibility is vulnerability. Miss Bennet believed the visible glove would enable Mr. Denton to identify it by the interior mark. I continued. She calculated that, in the crush of departure, he would seize the fallen glove and recognize it as hers. He would carry it here, to the riverside meeting, and deliver the concealed documents to the silent hand. Hastings frowned. "But Denton took the wrong glove." "Precisely. Because they were alike." "Because they were alike," I agreed. "And because he relied upon appearance rather than verification. Denton, vain and accustomed to easy triumphs, had assumed that the glove he retrieved was the correct one. He had not inspected it immediately. He had trusted resemblance, and in doing so, he had disrupted the entire chain of conspiracy. Miss Bennet, meanwhile, had discovered too late that the glove returned to her was not the one she had prepared. or that the message had passed elsewhere. By then, the damage was irretrievable. The chain of hands twisted unexpectedly, I said softly. Attendant, admirer, rival, friend. Each link altered the direction slightly, until the intended delivery never occurred. Hastings regarded the glove thoughtfully. And you believe Miss Ashford suspected something from the beginning? Not the full extent, I replied, but she observed more than she admitted. Miss Ashford's insistence upon investigating the exchange had not been mere loyalty. She had recognized the deliberate removal of the right glove on stage. She had perceived the subtle tension in Miss Marlowe before the performance, and when she discovered the cipher within the glove she received, she had understood instinctively that the matter extended beyond romantic intrigue. Innocence sometimes lies not in what is concealed, I murmured, recalling my earlier reflection, but in what is carried. Miss Ashford carried vigilance. She carried suspicion. She carried the cipher directly to me rather than attempting to decipher it alone. In doing so, she disrupted a scheme she did not fully comprehend, but instinctively distrusted. Hastings rose and paced briefly. It seems extraordinary, he said, that commercial ambition should hide itself behind artistic rivalry. Extraordinary, I echoed. On the contrary, art and commerce are seldom separated by more than a thin curtain. Miss Bennet's resentment toward Miss Marlowe was genuine, but resentment alone does not produce forged contracts. It requires opportunity and encouragement. Denton. Yes. Mr. Charles Denton had not conceived the plan alone, nor had he stitched the glove, but he had provided the financial motive and the expectation of gain. The revised performance contracts, once altered, would have bound Miss Marlowe to disadvantageous terms. Her future earnings would diminish. The opera's management, aligned with Denton's interests, would profit. Rivalry on stage, concealed calculation of it. Miss Bennet confessed, Hastings said slowly, that she relied upon the chaos of admiration and applause to mask her scheme. She was correct in that assessment, I replied. Crowds obscure responsibility. Noise disguises precision. It is easy to exchange objects in such environments without attracting notice, and yet she overlooked a detail. Yes, I set the glove down once more. She overlooked the psychology of visibility. A worn glove disappears into expectation. A carried glove demands interpretation. Hastings smiled faintly. You make it sound almost philosophical. It is practical, I corrected gently. Crime often fails not through lack of ingenuity, but through misjudgment of human attention. Miss Bennet had understood contracts. She had understood ambition. She had understood staging and timing, but she had underestimated curiosity. A glove carried in the hand draws the eye. A seam opened too neatly invites inspection. A cipher stitched with precision demands decoding. The smallest accessory, Hastings said thoughtfully, became the loudest witness. Exactly. I rose and walked to the window. Evening settled gently over the square. Lamps flickered on in neighboring houses, their light steady and domestic, so different from the theatrical brilliance of the opera. In the crowded opera house, I said quietly, amid music and acclaim, it was the silent glove that sang the clearest truth. Hastings chuckled softly. You grow poetic in conclusion. Poirot, perhaps, I admitted, but poetry is merely observation arranged with rhythm. He laughed at that. There remained one final consideration, one I had not yet voiced aloud. Miss Bennet had resigned quietly. Mr. Denton had withdrawn. Miss Marlowe remained unaware of how near she had come to contractual ruin. Only Miss Ashford knew the full extent, and she had accepted my counsel to maintain discretion. Yet ambition does not vanish with exposure, it retreats. I turned back toward the table. The lesson here, I said thoughtfully, is not only for criminals. Oh, yes, it is for those who rely too heavily upon noise to conceal intention. The louder the applause, the easier it is to believe that no one is watching carefully. And you were watching. I always watch, I replied simply. The glove lay motionless now, its purpose fulfilled, its secrets emptied. In the end, no dramatic arrest occurred beneath chandeliers, no public revelation assembled the suspects in a drawing room for theatrical accusation. Instead, the truth emerged quietly by the river, where a bare hand waited and found nothing. Justice, in this instance, required no spectacle. The opera would continue. Voices would rise and fall. Rivalries would bloom and fade. Contracts would be signed under honest terms. But somewhere in a wardrobe drawer, perhaps, another glove would one day be sewn, another seam opened, another message concealed. And if so, I reflected with calm certainty, it would not be the music that betrayed it. It would be the smallest detail, for objects speak, and when one listens carefully enough, even a silent glove may become the loudest voice of all.